Well, good evening and welcome to Tracking the Tropics, your weekly in-depth look at the tropics and how it will impact you. I'm CBS 17 meteorologist Brian Hutton Jr. in Raleigh, North Carolina, and right now we're tracking a fairly quiet tropics at the moment. The activity we've seen so far this season, anything can happen. And tonight you'll hear from a hurricane chaser who's seen and been in so many storms, a lot of stories to tell us, and a meteorologist in Arkansas who tracked Hurricane Laura from start to finish. But before we get into all of that, let's look at where we are with the 2020 hurricane season so far. And I don't have to tell you, it's been an active one, so much so we've gone to the Greek alphabet, and we're currently in the midst of the second most active season since 1851, rivaling the 2005 season, which had 28 named storms. We're currently, as of today, at 23. And while the tropics might be quiet for now, there are signs that we may start picking back up as we head into October. Of course, that's something that nobody wants to hear, but it's on our radar. We'll be watching as we move through the season. Here's where we are so far. We've crossed all the actual names off the list. We also have already crossed off Alpha and Beta, so the next system that would form would become Gamma. As we continue through the Greek alphabet, Gamma is next, followed by Delta, Epsilon, Zeta, and Eta. Hopefully we don't get much further on this list, but as I said, it's been a very active hurricane season so far, and there are signs that we might try and pick things back up as we head into the next about week and a half or so. So here's where we normally sit in our tropical climatology for the season. We are, of course, past the peak. The climatological peak of hurricane season is September 10th. It is now September 29th, so we are starting to try and get towards the downswing as far as tropical activity is concerned, but we're still in the peak of hurricane season. Even though we are about to cross into October, I don't have to tell you, the last couple of Octobers, we've seen some very active storms. All you have to do is go to the Florida Panhandle a couple of years ago with Hurricane Michael. So just because we're crossing into October doesn't mean we're done with strong or an active season yet. There's still a lot of season left. Remember, the season does go officially until November 30th. We've had named storms ahead of the season, and we've had named storms after the season officially ends as well. So it's something we have to constantly keep our eyes on. As far as the last 20 years or so, most of the storms have happened in September. And of course, when we roll this over next year, that number will now eclipse 100 easily of all the storms we saw last month. But you see, the three most active months during the hurricane season are September, August, and October. So just because we're about to turn the calendar doesn't mean we're done with the tropical activity, as it means the peak of the season. Again, October can be a very active month in the tropics, so we still have to be vigilant and we still have to keep our eyes out into the Atlantic. In fact, according to Dr. Phil Klotzbach from Colorado State, after August 1st, in a typical hurricane season, that's where we get 84% of our tropical storms, 91% of our hurricanes, and 95% of our major hurricanes. So again, we are well within the peak, and as this month has showed us, things can get very active very quickly. We've had 4 named storms at a time. We've seen a couple of landfalls, and so it doesn't take a lot for the season to kind of ramp back up in intensity. Hopefully that's not the case, but we can't put our guard down just yet. There is still a lot of season left. We are still in the peak of hurricane season. In fact, we really don't officially get out of the peak until about October 20th or so. So we still have about 3 more weeks worth of peak time in the tropics. And there is a system we are watching now. It's been quiet for about a week or so. That, though, started to change yesterday, with the National Hurricane Center noted that a system could develop in the Caribbean. Today, they've upped the chances. It's now up to a 6% chance of seeing tropical development in the Western Caribbean over the course of the next 5 days. It's tied to this broad tropical wave that's just south of the island of Hispaniola, and it's forecast to continue moving in a west-northwest general direction. And as it approaches just to the west of Jamaica and south of Cuba, it's likely to encounter an environment that will be very favorable for development, and that could allow a tropical system to develop. Because, as I mentioned, this has about a 6% chance of developing now, so it's something we'll have to keep our eyes on. No immediate development over the next 48 hours, but as we get towards the end of the week and this weekend, we could see something brewing here in the Western Caribbean. And in fact, our forecast models even have started picking up on that idea, and the reason for this is because it's extremely warm still into a good portion of the Atlantic. These are sea surface temperatures, what the ocean water temperature is. You can see there's still a lot of 80s out here, not just off the U.S. coast, but back towards Puerto Rico, the Lesser Antilles, and into the Caribbean as well, where the system is forecast to head. Water temperature is 87, 88 degrees. That's extremely warm, and that could lead to rapid tropical development if everything else in the atmosphere kind of lines itself up. It's looking like we could see that happen as we head towards the end of the week. Sea surface temperatures are definitely warm enough. We want 80 degrees or warmer. The shear is forecast to relax, which is something else the tropical systems need, is a light sheared environment. So the signs are there that by this weekend, we could be talking about our next potential tropical system forming as we head into the weekend into next week. Now, the question then is, okay, if this develops, where does this go? Of course, anytime something's in the Western Caribbean, that means that the Gulf of Mexico could potentially be in play. And here's one forecast model for us. I'm going to walk you through and see, not a lot of development over the next couple of days. I will pause this, though, as we get to Saturday morning. And this particular model does hint that we do see a tropical system develop heading towards either Belize or the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico as we head into this weekend. It will then cross the Yucatan and likely emerge into the southern Gulf of Mexico or the Bay of Campeche and likely head back down towards Mexico. So this is definitely something to watch over the course of about the next week or so. Again, it hasn't developed yet. We're talking about what could be. But signs point that things are favorable, that this tropical wave we're watching could become our next tropical system. It's too early to tell how strong it will be. It's too early to talk about an exact track because models don't do a good job with that until an area of low pressure has formed. But signs are pointing that something could develop here in the Western Caribbean as we head towards this weekend. So it is something that we are going to be keeping our eyes on. Otherwise, the tropics are quiet. I think we have earned a break, definitely so far this year, let alone the month of September. And hopefully this break lasts a little while longer as well. I don't know about you, but this season has seemed to go on for a very long time, and those who have been directly impacted definitely deserve a break. All right, let's shift gears here now. Joining me live on Tracking the Tropics from Gulfport, Mississippi is Greg Nordstrom. He's a meteorology instructor at Mississippi State University, who also doubles as a hurricane chaser. Now, Greg has been out in plenty of storms, and while there isn't much activity to get into right now, he has a ton of stories for you. So, Greg, welcome to the show. And I guess the first thing I want to ask is a lot of people are probably curious, what exactly is a hurricane chaser?
I mean, basically what I do is I wouldn't necessarily say you chase them because you kind of intercept them, I guess, but you just follow them to wherever they go. You try your best to be safe. This is not a game. It's not a situation where you can make a mistake and, go, oh, well, I made a mistake. Let me fix it. It doesn't really work that way. You got to be really cautious. It takes a lot of years of practice and really understanding the history of hurricanes. I'm a weather historian. I've been studying these since I was a little kid. So well over 30 years now that I've been studying these storms. And if you really know what the past has done, it can help you. Now, obviously, there's no guarantees. No matter, what you do, you could always get yourself in trouble. I mean, there's no guarantees in it. But there's a lot of precautions I take. One of the first things I try to do is find parking structures. Parking garages, especially ones that are a little bit inland, not right on the water, because even as strong as a parking structure is, if you're dealing with storm surge and you're dealing with debris on the water smashing into that parking structure, that's something you don't want to do. So there's a lot into it. I mean, there's a lot of studying, a lot of history behind it. And really, the first one to ever really hurricane chase was a guy named Jim Leonard, and he started that in the early 70s.
That's fascinating. So a lot of history there with that. And so whenever we talk of chasers, I think a lot of people probably first go to those who are storm chasers, chasing tornadoes out into the plains. Those have kind of really exploded in popularity the last few years. And they usually offer some scientific insights that we wouldn't get otherwise. Is the same thing true for what you do with hurricane chasing?
Yeah, and I go out to the Great Plains as well. So I definitely go after tornadoes. I go after nor'easters. I'll go after anything, really. I love all different types of weather. But the tropics are my favorite. And I'm working with a guy named Mark Sudduth from hurricanetrack.com. And obviously, look, I'm not going to sit here and lie. There is an adrenaline behind this. I mean, you're just lying if you're not saying that. Because when you get into winds of 150 miles per hour, I don't care who you are, your adrenaline's going to, go up. But there is a science side to this. And we put out weather stations. We try to put those out. And some of these weather stations, they're not cheap. An RM Young anemometer in a station can cost over $2,000. You got to get a Raspberry Pi. You got to get different things to, be able to connect to it and talk to it. So we have weather stations. We put out live cams. So that's another thing. Like going back to the chasing, obviously you want to be as careful as you can. But what we do is, like, for example, with Laura, I knew Lake Charles was as far south as you want to go. If you start going south of there and you get down to Cameron, Louisiana, it's nearly impossible to survive because of the storm surge. So what we do is we go down there and we put these live cams up, and that way you get a view into the worst of the hurricane without risking anybody's life. So we put those cameras up, we'll put GoPros, We got weather stations, we got pressure sensors, and we put them all over the place, not just right along the coast, but inland as well to get a really good trace of the hurricane, not only at landfall, but as it comes inland as well.
Right, all very important information that is vital to meteorologists, the Hurricane Center, the Weather Forecast Office, and those of us on the TV side as well, passing that information along. So as you mentioned, chasing hurricanes, that puts you in a dangerous spot. You try to get directly into the eye wall and into the eye of the storm. And you've kind of talked about this, you've hinted at this. Has there ever been a time while you've been out there chasing and you thought things perhaps weren't going to end well, or that maybe you bit off more than you can chew?
No, I've never put myself in that situation because I won't. I mean, look, no one's perfect. Everyone makes mistakes, right? I'm not saying perfect, but I've done this long enough to know that if I don't feel comfortable, then why stay? There's no point. As much as I love to chase and as much as I want to get as close as I can, I like to live so I can go chase again, right? So that's the whole point of it. But I've been in some strong storms. Now, Katrina, of course, I was in Gulfport. That was an incredibly bad hurricane. I was in Hurricane Charlotte my bad, Hurricane Charlie. This was in Port Charlotte, Florida. That was almost a Category 5, 150 mile per hour, Category 4. I was in Laura recently. That was also 150 mile per hour, Category 4. So I've been in some very powerful hurricanes, and I've been fairly close to the water. But every time I'm overly cautious. Not to criticize or judge anybody else because everyone else has their own style. But I'm not going to get in my car. I'm not going to drive around in it. I'm not once I pick a spot, even if that hurricane starts turning and it looks like I'm going to miss it a little bit, like a good example of that would be Ivan. I just accept, hey, you know what? Next time I'm just going to have to do better. Because I think when you're scrambling last minute and you're getting in your car and you're driving places, especially in the dark without power, that's where you can get yourself in a dangerous spot quickly. And like I was saying at the very beginning, this isn't a hobby or a sport or whatever you want to call it, that you can really make mistakes like that because it can cost you your life.
Yeah, I think that's an important footnote here for those who are watching, that this is not something for you to just go out and do. You definitely want to be, know what you're doing before you do it.
Yeah, and even with me, I learned from people that did it a long time. Like I said, I had mentors just like anybody else. One of my biggest mentors is a guy named Michael Locke, and he learned from Jim Leonard, who was the pioneer hurricane shooting. So I've been very blessed to learn from some of the best that ever did it. And this guy, he was an Andrew and Hugo and Opal and Gilbert. So this guy's been in a lot of hurricanes, and he taught me a lot. And you know, again, like you said, don't just look. This is fascinating. It is fun. It's interesting. I'm not saying don't ever do it, but just don't get in your car and go do it randomly. Make sure you learn the history. Make sure you learn from someone who knows what they're doing. Make sure you learn from someone that's been in a few hurricanes, because again, you can get yourself in a tough spot, and it doesn't matter how much experience you have. Look at someone like Tim Samaras. That's one of the smartest tornadoes and researchers there ever was, and he got killed in a tornado. So it just goes to show, no matter how much you prepare and how much you know, you can still get yourself in trouble. There's no guarantee in this.
Right. So you've been in a lot. You've been in people who've been with a lot. So how many storms have you been in, and which one of those is the most memorable for you?
I've been in 21 hurricanes now. I've seen over 100 tornadoes. I've been in a lot of blizzards. But for me, the two top ones are really three, actually: Hurricane Charlie, Hurricane Laura, which just happened, and Hurricane Katrina. Now, they're all different. They're hard to compare, but Charlie was the strongest as far as the fastest winds I've ever seen. I would say the gusts in that were pushing 170, 175 miles per hour. So incredibly high gusts. And it was daytime, and I got in the eye of a 5 nautical mile wide eye, which is really, yes, there's skill, but that took a lot of luck as well. And to get into a stadium eye at daytime and almost a Category 5 hurricane, I don't know how that will ever be topped. I mean, that's just, it's almost impossible to explain in words. You just have to be there to see it. Laura wasn't quite as strong as Charlie, but it was close. It was neck and neck. But the difference was Charlie's worst last, I don't know, 30 minutes to an hour. It was over pretty quick. It was kind of like, the best way I describe it is Charlie was like getting hit by Mike Tyson in his prime one time, and that's it, you're knocked out. Whereas Laura was like fighting Muhammad Ali for 12 rounds, and he's just beating you up slowly and beating you slowly. And that's how Laura was, is it just was unrelenting. It just kept coming and coming and coming and coming. And then lastly, Katrina, while the winds were nowhere near as high as Charlie or Laura, the storm surge, which look, the wind is what a lot of people will talk about, but the water is what's going to kill you. 9 out of 10 people that die in hurricanes die from water, right? So the water on Katrina was just it's just unmanageable to really describe a storm surge of nearly 30 feet. So those are the three that I would put, one, two, and three in that order, going Charlie, Laura, and then Katrina.
Yeah, I knew Charlie was going to, I remember you telling me stories when I was at Mississippi State about Charlie, so I knew Charlie was going to be on the list. I'm surprised to hear Laura up there, though. That really goes to the power of what Laura was just a little over a month ago, so that's fascinating there. So last question here, and then we'll let you go this evening. So you've seen the destruction of these storms and what they can bring firsthand. What is your advice to people who are in mandatory evacuation zones and are thinking about staying behind?
Look, I get it. I live in Gulfport, Mississippi. I have a home. I'm a homeowner. All right. So I get it. You don't want to leave your home. And when things get bad, sometimes you can't get back in for the week. So I get it. I completely understand the passion to want to stay where you are, plus you might have family here. You might have friends here. You feel safe. Now, look, it depends on the situation. If it's not an overly strong storm, yeah, you're probably going to be okay, but you got to be careful even with that because sometimes these storms really strengthen at the last minute. Look at Sally, right? Sally was only supposed to be a Cat 1, and that last 6 hours, it really ramped up and got right on that Cat 2, Cat 3 border and really caught a lot of people off guard. So my recommendation is, and I know it's tough because, look at me, I'm staying in them, but I'll tell you this much, my wife and eventually when we have kids, and ironically, my wife works in broadcast meteorology, so she probably had to stay. But I'll tell you this much for sure: the kids, we get them out of here, and especially if you're in a storm surge area, it's one thing to hide from the wind, but you got to run from the water. The water is what will kill you. If you're anywhere on a coastal area, you're anywhere that is prone to storm surge, please listen and get out. And even if it's missed multiple times or there've been bad forecasts or you keep thinking it can't hit us, trust me, eventually your luck will run out, So a lot of areas have been lucky for a long time. Somewhere like Tampa hasn't been hit in a long time or Savannah hasn't been hit bad in a long time. But eventually it will happen. And when you're in those low-lying areas and you're in a storm surge prone area, you need to get out because that will kill you.
Yeah, wise advice. They're not just from what we always say, but also from someone who chases himself. Greg, I appreciate you for the stories. It's good to see you again, my friend, and the insight, everything. So thank you so much. We salute you for your bravery as well in getting out there and being in the worst of it. Stay safe. That's Greg Nordstrom in Gulfport, Mississippi. Greg, thank you so much for spending part of your evening with us. I appreciate it. Good to see you, my friend.
Hey, no problem, Brandon. Great talking to you again.
All right, Greg, have a great evening. All right, our next guest comes to us from Little Rock, Arkansas, but the man travels far and wide during this time of the year. I'm talking about KARK's Keith Monahan, who our Wes Hohenstein spoke with about Hurricane Laura and what it was like being in a storm that was so powerful, especially during this pandemic. Although Keith wasn't so fortunate to avoid COVID-19, as you'll hear Wes ask him, the opportunity to cover Laura kept him going. Check it out.
We also have someone who was on the ground when that storm hit. Let's go to Little Rock, Arkansas. You may have seen him on your TV throughout the coverage. Keith Monahan was covering the hurricane for more than 100 TV stations across the country, and Keith is good enough to join us now. Joining us from home because, Keith, in addition to living through what you lived through a couple weeks ago with Hurricane Laura, you also tested positive for coronavirus. How have you been feeling since living through that Category 4 hurricane, and how are you feeling today after testing positive?
Well, I'll tell you what, Wes, Laura was far more scary, for sure. Really has not been a big deal. I don't have any other pre-existing conditions, so I had a little bit of a scratchy throat, a little bit of a cough, a little bit of a headache. If somebody at work hadn't tested positive, I would have just chalked it up to hay fever and not even thought about going down to get tested.
Good. Well, we're so glad you're doing okay, and we're glad you're here with us. Category 4 hurricane, 150-mile-per-hour winds at landfall. Most of us will never, thankfully, live through something like that. You were on the ground covering it. Kind of walk us through what it was like as that storm was making landfall.
Well, certainly it was a surprise for my photographer and I. As you know, Wes, as we started to cover that storm, it was only supposed to be a Category 1 or 2 initially when it made landfall. But due to Marco's quick demise, really left the door open for rapid intensification, especially during late Tuesday into the Wednesday timeframe. So when we went down there to cover the storm for Nexstar, we never imagined we'd be going through a strong Category 4 hurricane. So essentially what we did the first several days down there, like most reporters do, we started at the coast, talked about the preps down there for the big storm surge, made our way inland to do live reports for the couple of days leading up to it. And then Wednesday, of course, we got back to Lake Charles, stayed put there. And I'll tell you that the most impressive part of the storm for me was I was getting ready to do a live shot for my station in Little Rock at about 10:20. And it was raining quite a bit. The tropical systems have those really tiny raindrops that blow around and instantly gets you soaked. But the wind's hardly even gusting the tropical storm force. We lost our live shot because our camera got wet because of all the moisture. So we had to shoot it on our phones with an app that basically acts like what we a lot of time use, the backpack. And in that 20 minutes, we went from 0 to 60, so to speak, like driving a car. It went from just a couple of gusts to tropical storm force to sustained winds, nearly hurricane force in about 20 minutes. And that's when the eye wall itself was approaching Lake Charles. So certainly it was as far as meteorologically, a very, very impressive storm as it began to affect our location in Lake Charles.
Well, let's remind everyone, too, this storm made landfall in the middle of the night, 1, 2, 3 in the morning, depending on where you live and where you're watching from. So you're going through all this in the middle of the night. How is that?
Well, it's fine until the power goes off. That's the thing. Lights give you such a feeling of comfort. But as soon as that eye wall was in the Lake Charles area for maybe 45 minutes to an hour, then the power went out. And then all you get to concentrate on is the sound, the darkness, and the debris hitting the building. That was, to me, the most impressive, and not in a good way, the most impressive part of the storm is you're in there in the dark with no sound. None of our equipment was working. The normal background sounds you hear, air conditioning, refrigerators. It was just dead quiet except for, it wasn't even the howl of the wind. It was the roar of the wind, the building shuddering, and the sound of debris hitting the building itself, roofs coming off from other hotels. In fact, for a time, when the peak winds were moving through where we were located on the east side of Lake Charles, the lake itself, the building shuddered so bad and the winds were so strong, it blew out one of the side doors, one of the side hotel entry doors, and that allowed kind of a suction to develop in the hotel. And then that started pulling ceiling tiles down. And that's when my photographer and we had prearranged the safe room, the hotel pantry, and we hunkered down in there, but not knowing that ceiling had already caved in. So the floor was littered with not just those foam ceiling tiles, but actually wood. Thankfully, we didn't go in there earlier, or we might have been hurt, but we had mattresses in there, and we stayed in there for about an hour. It was, for a weather guy to kind of look to take cover, it says a pretty big thing about how strong the storm was.
So you're kind of set up in the hotel room. That's your base. So you're saying during the overnight hours, you guys had to evacuate your hotel room and go to the hotel pantry, I'm guessing downstairs in the kitchen around there?
Right. So what we did is the management closed the hotel completely. They allowed us to stay. So other than a hotel watch person, there was one person who worked for the hotel that was there. We were the only guests. So we actually had set up in the lobby. And since we knew we weren't going to be impacted by the storm surge, we knew that we'd be safe there as far as that was concerned, because we just needed an open area to work from. And I'm kind of glad we weren't in our room, because we were on the 4th floor, and the roof came off before the power even went out. And so water started flowing in through the hotel, and there was several inches of water on every floor. So actually, it was kind of smart for us to be on the ground floor, since there wouldn't be a storm surge issue there. And then that's when we got really concerned and went into that hotel pantry, about 50 feet away from the lobby.
Again, Keith Monahan joining us on Tracking the Tropics. Keith, some of the damage reports you mentioned on your hotel that also knocked down a TV tower, it knocked down a radar tower from the Weather Service. I mean, was there ever a time where you were like really concerned, even though you guys took all these safety precautions?
To be honest with you, there was about an hour that I wasn't concerned for the worst, but my photographer and I were prepared to get injured because of what was happening to the hotel. It was like the shuttering was so bad, and with that door on the side of the hotel blown open, which was right down the hallway from where our safe room was, we just really couldn't be sure on how much of the structure of the hotel was going to fail. But we never worried about the worst, but we worried for about an hour about getting hurt. So I'll admit I was under a mattress under the stainless steel sink. And the funny thing is, never lost cell phone service during the whole thing. So we were able to get tweets out, and we were able to send some videos out while this was happening. So that actually was kind of helpful. It took our minds off of what was going on outside just a little bit.
Wow. You need to do a commercial for a cell service carrier, possibly. Keith, you are the one representative, along with your photographer, who was covering this storm for many cities and states and TV stations across the country. Kind of take us behind the scenes. How does that work? You and your photographer, two people, bringing images and stories all across the country. I'm sure it's a really busy night when you're doing that.
Well, not only a busy night, Wes, but it was a busy week. We actually started on Sunday with just a few live shots, but Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, we basically were the afternoon and evening crew, and we did a total of 106 live shots. And how that works is there's 5-minute windows given to every TV station that wants to have a live interview with us, and you basically have to call each station. As you finish one station, you have the phone number listed in what's called a grid, and then you call the next station, the producer there, and then they hook you up with the IFB like I'm listening to now, so you can hear the anchors, and then you do the same report, and then they ask questions. It got easier on Wednesday because what they did is I would just call into one main number, and then they would have what's called the IFB producer in the bunker that would connect me automatically. So that made life a lot easier, just not having me have to dial every station, but somebody else did it for me. And that made the reporting easier. I was able to concentrate more on what I was doing versus worrying about dialing the phone and getting in touch with every station. So 106 total live shots. About 12 of those were during the height of the hurricane overnight, Wednesday night into Thursday morning. And we really we rode out a rough storm, that is for sure. It was probably the worst storm I will say the worst storm I've ever been in. And again, not expecting to have to do that when we went down there. We really had to change what our plans were to keep us safe throughout that Wednesday night and Thursday morning.
Yeah, and Keith, you are in Little Rock, and people might be thinking, well, Arkansas doesn't get any hurricanes, but you also spent a lot of time in some hurricane-prone areas like Houston, Texas. How does this compare to some of the storms you saw while living in Southeast Texas and other places?
Well, Ike was the last storm I went through, and that did move directly over the Houston area. Rita in 2005 was mainly over East Texas, so Houston was on the west side, which is notoriously not as strong. Those pale in comparison. This storm was unbelievable in its ferocity and the sound. I mean, because I went through Ike and went through Ike in our TV station in Houston, and this building that we were in, the hotel, was really well built. I mean, it was a newer building. It wasn't old construction. So this was far worse. The sound, the damage, the amount of rain and the amount of storm surge in some areas. For us, with the eye going directly over the western part of Lake Charles, that kind of spared the Lake Charles area itself from a significant storm surge. That was more over in eastern Cameron Parish, over toward Cameron, Louisiana. But the wind itself, and the funny thing is that, and a lot of people might have seen the picture of the radar missing from Lake Charles. They also lost at Fort Polk, the backup, through a communications problem. So we were actually getting the radar imagery from Houston because it was so far. How it put the radar on the maps really didn't tell the whole story, because according to the radar, we were supposed to be right in the middle of the eye, but the distance from Houston to Lake Charles kind of displaced where the eye really was appearing on the maps that use the radar overlays. So we stayed in the eye wall, the northeast and south side of the eye wall the whole time.
Yeah, we have to remember that thanks to the curvature of the Earth, if your radar signal is really far away, that kind of changes the perspective. That's an important point. When you left, when you finally, signed off and started headed back home from South Louisiana up to Arkansas, did you drive by or see anything and have an exchange with your photographer and like, wow, I'm glad we weren't there, or wow, we were lucky? How bad was it when you were leaving town?
When we were leaving town, and I'll tell you, the response was amazing down there. Most of the thoroughfares were cleared within a few hours. And even while we were doing the live shots that afternoon after the hurricane, it was a beautiful afternoon down there. We got done with the hurricane at about 4 or 5 in the morning on Thursday, and by 3 Thursday afternoon, the sun was out. I was downtown. There were some collapsed buildings in the downtown area, a lot of trees down, a lot of roof damage. And as we left and started returning home, that damage actually continued quite a ways, all the way up, in fact, Shreveport. There were parts of Shreveport that had wind damage and as well as power outages. So Laura actually covered a very, very wide area as far as damage was concerned.
All right, Keith, I'll get you out of here on this one. We are on the verge of going through all 21 names this season, a record season. We're talking about using the Greek alphabet. You've covered storms for a long time. Can you kind of put this season in perspective about what we're living through here in 2020?
Well, certainly, Wes, you know as well. I mean, we know how that works. You run out of storm names, you start using the Greek alphabet. In 2005, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think we got up to Storm Zeta, which was 6 names, 6 letters into the Greek alphabet. And we are actually ahead of the current count that they had in 2005, at least time-wise. So this will end up being a busy season, but it's only impactful if you have a lot of the storms hit coastal areas or affect population areas. You can have all the hurricanes you want out in the ocean. It's just going to bother ships and seagulls. But if we could keep a lot of these storms, as we have, from hitting the U.S. or the Caribbean, it'll just be more of an academic thing. So we're hoping that even though there are a lot of storms and there's still plenty of hurricane season left, those storms don't impact the U.S. or adjacent land areas.
Keith Monahan, along with his photographer, lived through ground zero, Hurricane Laura, a few weeks ago, and he is here talking about it tonight. Keith, and you're surviving coronavirus. Stay healthy. Glad you made it through the hurricane. Thanks so much for sharing your story with us on Tracking the Tropics tonight.
All right, well, it's great to be with you. Have a good afternoon.
We'll talk to you down the road. And again, that is Keith.
That was fantastic. 2 great interviews there with Greg Nordstrom, hurricane chaser and instructor at Mississippi State University. And also there, as you just heard, Keith Monahan, a meteorologist at KARK in Little Rock, who also went through Laura, both of which actually were in Laura, about the same spot as well. So just how powerful Laura was and what stories we've learned from them, that hopefully if you are impacted, hopefully we don't see another storm this year, but if you are, take any of those warnings seriously. Thank you for joining us for tonight's Tracking the Tropics. Don't forget, we'll be here every Tuesday night at 8 throughout the Atlantic hurricane season. Thank you for spending part of your night with us. Live in Raleigh, North Carolina, I'm Brian Hutton Jr. Have a great rest of your Tuesday.